let me address a couple of things. Mary ended that last session with some examples, and she's going to come back with some more, and we'll talk about some more things. But let me state this. She talked about using a paddle board or a ping pong board or something like that. That is less shocking to the body and physically damaging, especially for little girls. Little girls especially, you can cause big problems with their female organs and everything else by using the hand. That's the physical aspect. The psychological aspect of using the hand is this. In their mind, you are the inflictor of the pain, the sting. You are the bad person for hitting them because it's your hand. Where if you use like a paddle board, our experience has been they get angry with the paddle board, not you. It's more of a, we had one child who hit our stuff because they thought that would fix it, because they were so angry at the board that if I can just get rid of this, they were too young to figure out they might just go buy another one. But the issue wasn't mom and dad, because mom and dad would explain to them, this is what we said, here's what we instructed, here's what you need to do, here's how we live life, and it goes great. You didn't, and this was one of the things we did. So that means you have a sassy stuck. It's another way of saying foolishness is bound up in your heart, and we got to get it out. You've got a sassy stuck. This is for the younger ones. So now mom and dad have to help you. And then the paddleboard would come out. And their attention went to the paddleboard. We're trying to help them get the sassy out. And the only way we know how is the paddleboard will get it out for us. So the paddleboard became what in the world's the deal with that paddleboard? I hate that paddleboard. No. Mom and dad are trying to help me get the sassy out and get me back over here. So a distinction came of it's not mom and dad beating you. It's there's a sassy stuck. We can't let you keep doing this. We need you. Remember what we said. Remember how we have to do it. Well, see, now this is what happens. And if they're old enough, and Mary will come back and share some of this, if they're old enough, they have some cognitive going on here. You can explain, but if you keep doing this is where it's going to go, and it's going to this could happen or that could happen. These are all really bad, and we love you too much to let that sassy be stuck, and you hurt yourself out there. So mom and dad want to get you back here because we love you, but you got a sassy stuck, and the paddleboard knows how to get the sassy out. So the focus went to the paddleboard rather than mom and dad are beating me again, kind of thing. The question came in about what about the use of belts? The belts you wear around your waist, hold your pants up kind of belts. I personally discouraged the use of belts because unless you really know what you're doing, you can damage the child. They will leave welts. They will leave marks. There's just better routes to go. I just wouldn't use it. Now, it was used on me, and I understand belts, and I understand how belts feel. I'm going to share a little story because my parents are both dead, and they won't care at this point anyway. So I can share some things. It was a toss-up between my mom and dad getting a spanking from them with a belt, because my dad had good aim, so he'd get you where it's padded, but he had more power, and it stung more. Mom didn't nearly have the power, but she had no aim. Anything from the neck to the ankles was fair game. It's just like, wherever it lands is good. And it's like, okay, who do I choose here? Because one's not going to sting as much, but I could get it anywhere. And the other one's going to sting more, but at least I know what to prepare for, kind of thing. But where we're at now, I just think there's better routes to go. I don't think you need to use a belt. Like I said, I would prefer a paddleboard because it does the job better, and you're not going to damage the child if you use the flat side of it. It's just going to sting. So let's go on and talk about Hebrews 12, and let me put a thought in your mind right from the beginning here. I'll preface this by saying all the principles in Proverbs, even though a lot of them The book seems to be written much more towards child instruction and discipline. All those principles work on adults. All of them. Hebrews 12 is not written for children at all. This is written to explain how God deals with his children, which is human beings. That can be any age, especially adults. But the principles, if it works for God, we as parents can use the same principles, imitate him, and go with it. The kicker is you can have, if you have an adult who didn't have this process take place correctly, and the instruction and the correction and the physical or emotional or verbal or some kind of reinforcement that stung enough to kind of get them back over here, if that didn't take place correctly, I don't care how old they are, they're just a big kid. And they will act like a big kid when any kind of correction shows up. If they got by in their family not having to listen when they were corrected and discipline did no good, you never got in front of it, the child always won, that child's going to be a real interesting person as an adult. Because what you have is a chronologically older person outside, but mentally and emotionally, you have a little kid who's learned how to throw fits and get their own way, and that's what they will do as an adult. So Proverbs fits for adults who are little kids inside as much as Hebrews fits for them also. The principles are good because some point, if life is going to work the way it's supposed to, we all have to grow up. Yeah. That's all, let's do it. Now, Hebrews 12 is talking about God growing us up as believers and getting us out of the child stage into sons and how he does that in discipline and so forth. That applies to everybody. I mean, if someone gets born again and they're 59 years old, God will begin instructing them and correcting them and working them forward in maturity as what they actually are. They're a babe in Christ. They're an infant in Christ. They're just starting, even though chronologically they're old. So the principles fit for adults, for children, for whatever. But the bottom line is, what God is after is what Jesus said. Be like your Father in heaven. Be mature like your Father in heaven. He said that in the Sermon on the Mount. God is after maturity. So let's go to Hebrews 12. Let's walk through some of this, and then Mary come back and give some more examples. We'll start at verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So here is the point of this chapter. Things can hinder us from doing what God wants us to do. Sin can entangle us and stop us from what God wants us to do. And we may not have learned perseverance, which will also stop us from running the race or finishing the race that God marked out for us. Getting entangled in sin things, not throwing off the things in life that hinder, and not learning perseverance are all taught right here, and they should be taught in childhood. In adulthood, it's much harder to teach someone those things because they have to voluntarily submit to your teaching and instruction and discipline and correction and so forth. Adults, this is a voluntary game, and he points that out here in Hebrews 12. For children, you have a captive audience. They're in your family. Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? We have a beautiful window to instill some things that, if we do it the right way, it'll work, and they don't have to agree to it. We're going to put it into their mind. It's going to change who they are. It's going to change their behavior, and when they become adults, they'll have it. When you start with adults, like God is dealing with here, believers, people get saved when they're adults, these three things have to be dealt with, and they're part of the early maturing and growing cycle of a child, and this is a spiritual child. It's a newborn babe, born-again person. But here is what we're dealing with, those three things. Things that hinder us, not necessarily sin, but things that hinder us. Sin that entangles us, and the lack of perseverance. Those are three things that need to be dealt with to create a mature son or child. Number 2, verse 2, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So he says, here are the three things, verse 1, we have to deal with in you. In order for you to understand this, look at Jesus. It wasn't a happy time. Fix your eyes on Jesus. He had joy in the future that he focused on, but he endured the cross, scorning its shame, in order to get to the future where the joy would be. Sin is always tied to shame, and to overcome it always includes pain. Remember the first three: hindrances, sin, perseverance. Hindrances are not necessarily always tied to shame, but they're tied usually to self-will. We like whatever it is, so we hang on to it. Sin is tied to shame, and it takes pain to shake that out of our life. And perseverance is tied to pain. Ask anybody who is in a sport. Well, I'm going to get in shape because I'm going to play basketball, I'm going to run, I'm going to lift weights, and I'm out of shape. I'm going to get in shape. You know what they just announced? Yeah, for the next 3 weeks, life's going to suck for you. You're going to be in pain, you're going to get stiff, you're going to get sore, those first couple of weeks of basketball practice, you thought you were going to die. But it's part of moving forward and accomplishing. It's just part of it. The same thing is true for us spiritually. The same thing is true for a child who's being disciplined. Well, I don't want to cause them pain. Then you'll never grow them up. You just won't. You won't mature them. Sadly to say, in this earth system, us being in a flesh container that has fallen, there has to be some form of sting involved to spur us on to grow up, or we just don't grow up. It's just the way it is. Verse 3, he's continuing with Jesus' example. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Grow weary and lose heart in what? Verse number 1, getting rid of the hindrances, the sin, and learning how to persevere. You can actually grow weary of that and quit as an adult. This is a volunteer thing. Well, I don't like what God is asking me to do in my life. You can quit. Mm-hmm. Yep. See, now, when we were raising our children, quitting was never an option. I mean, we didn't. That was just one of those things. You're going to learn to persevere. If you signed up for a sport, you're going to finish it. That's all to it. I mean, you signed up, well, I don't like it anymore. It's all right. You only got 5 weeks left, and it'll be over, and you don't have to ever sign up again. But you will finish it. You will learn to persevere. It's part of maturing and growing up, because guess what? As an adult, there's things we don't like, and we have to learn to persevere if we want a good outcome. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the sooner we learn that, the better life goes. It's part of the instruction and correction and that whole thing. And he's using Jesus as an example and saying Jesus didn't have it all roses either. There were people opposing him. And he couldn't quit. He had to go all the way through and persevere. Verse 4, in your struggle against sin. So now we're back to this main topic this chapter is about. As a believer, growing up, we're going to have sin issues we're going to struggle against. So he says, in your struggle against sin, you've not resisted to the point of shedding blood. See, Jesus was struggling against quitting so strongly that he broke out, he sweat drops of blood, which is huge. Scientists say it can happen, and literally your body is under such stress that some of the capillaries near the surface of your skin break, so blood mixes with the perspiration. It looks like you're perspiring blood. It turns red. That comes from being under extreme stress. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane was under such extreme stress with the temptation to quit. But, okay, if you're not going to remove this cup from me, well, what is that in our language? Could you please take this off? I want to quit. Well, if you're not going to do it, not my will, but thine be done. He battled that through perseverance. He set the example. He said, well, you're struggling with sin in your life. How many of you have resisted it to the point you broke out sweating drops of blood? You say, well, what's the point? Number one is, we're not fighting it probably as hard as we think we are. Number two, dealing with sin in our life, consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men. Dealing with sin usually includes dealing with sinful people. As adults, as we're growing in Christ, our own sin is usually tied to other people somehow, and we're going to have to resolve those relationship issues, whatever they may be, however they may look, to fully beat our own sin. In your, verse 4, in your struggle against sin, you've not resisted to the point of shedding blood, which shows the intensity it can get to. Verse 5, have you forgotten the word of encouragement that addresses you as sons? First thing I want to point out there, well, let me finish the verse. My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, or there the word chastening is used in the King James. NIV uses discipline, it's the same thought. And do not lose heart when he rebukes you. So there's a few things there in that verse that are really important. Discipline is a word of encouragement. This is something that's supposed to be good because it gets us back into the way it's supposed to operate. So when God says, I will discipline you, that is a word of encouragement rather than, why do you hate me so much? Why don't you like me, God? I mean, you discipline me. No, that actually is an action or a revelation of love for you, which he'll say later, if you love your son, you will discipline him. Why? It's an encouragement to get back over there. Because if you stay over here, you're headed the wrong direction, you're going to cause problems for yourself. Number two, word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. Now, I want to point this out because this is big and it gets missed a lot. God does not discipline the person as long as they are in the maturity level of a child. Not in this chapter, it doesn't show up once. He disciplines his sons. So he waits until we've matured some to start inflicting a sting, because now we're mature enough to go, oh yeah, I see it, I understand it, I get it. And it's not something that we perceive as, you could use the word abuse, I suppose, or where he's treating us badly. Number one. Number two is, he will say it here 2 times. Discipline as a believer is something we willfully submit to. You have to have a realm of maturity that says, yeah, I was speeding, the cop gave me a ticket, and I'm not going to go to court and fight it. I'll just pay the fine. I will submit to that discipline. That stings, but I'll submit to it. It's the immature who goes, well, I wasn't going that much over the speed limit. And besides, I'm going to go to court and fight this. Put that into a Christian realm. If you're too immature to understand what God's after, all the sting is going to do is make you angry with God and turn to walk away. You have to have enough maturity that you can submit to the sting and go, yeah, this really hurts, but you're right. I need to deal with this. He does not use the Greek word any place in this chapter and ties it to discipline, the Greek word for children. He uses the Greek word for sons, which, according to Galatians 4, the beginning part of the chapter, is dealing with someone more mature, someone more seasoned. He says, my son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. So in other words, when it stings, even though we know, yeah, this is probably the best thing, we can lose heart and quit. And he's saying right from the beginning, God will discipline you. Once you reach a certain point of maturity, now he sees he can work with you and grow you more and faster. He will discipline you. Don't you dare quit when he starts. Don't lose heart. God will rebuke you. It's supposed to be an encouraging thing. Don't quit. Verse 6, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. So now, take some of this and apply it to us and our children. I'm sure we've all made the mistake. I know I've made the mistake. Disciplining when the child had no concept of what you were doing. I've seen parents, now I never did this, thank God, but I've seen parents spank their 6 and 8 month old. And it's like, are you serious? That child has no clue what you're doing or why you're doing it. It's no. They have to understand instruction and correction before you do anything that causes a sting. If you miss these two, you're going to create a monster over here. Mm-hmm. And they can be 2, 3 years old. You know, I'm not going to give examples. I've got thousands of examples from my family, but I'm going to honor their request not to use them as examples. But there were times that they could be 2 years old, and you instructed them, and you explained it to them, and they did it anyway, so you brought them back and corrected them, and then before you left the room, you said, now tell me what should you do? I shouldn't go play with the dirt in the plant. Okay, you got it. And you walk out of the room, and you peek around the corner, because they, out of sight, out of mind. And they go over to the plant, and they look, room's empty. See now, even at 2, they know they were corrected. Now we have to do something that stings a little bit because foolishness is in their heart. But until they get this, you can't go to discipline. You just can't do it. It will destroy the whole process. It will mess it up. But if you love them, once they get this and they've got even just a little bit of maturity, you can give just a little bit of sting. Now, you don't give them what you would a 16-year-old, but you can give them a little bit of sting. But if they don't understand this, there's no 10-month-old child who understands why they're getting a spanking. They don't get it. You're creating a monster if you do that that's going to later turn on you. Well, I love them. Well, the Lord does discipline those he loves, but read the rest of the verse. And he punishes everyone he accepts as a son. Not a baby, not an infant, not a child. There is a realm of maturity that has to be gained. And I'm not saying they have to be 25 years old before you start disciplining them, but they have to understand that facet before you go to this. And if you do love them, you will do this because every child will test your reins. Every child will test your reins. And they have to understand there's limits, there's consequences, because life is good when you live in righteousness. You get into unrighteousness, the sooner they learn you can't live in unrighteousness, it'll kill you. Sooner they learn that, the better. And it'd be better for them to learn it at 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 than at 25. Because out there, at that age, the sting is much worse than it is back when they're younger. That verse, number 6, comes out of Proverbs. Proverbs 3, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline nor resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father, the son he delights in. So this can be used as an example. God to us, as a father, the son he delights in, as fathers do with their children. So this whole thing in Hebrews 12 can be used as an example. Verse 7, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not disciplined by his father? That's the NIV, I believe. Amplified says you must submit to and endure correction for discipline. So even over here in discipline, we're trying to correct them and get them back. It's just we're using a little stronger method of dealing with that. God is dealing with you as sons, not children, sons. For what son is there whom a father does not thus train and correct and discipline? King James says, if you endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the father chasteneth not? God's correction, God's discipline from him is because he loves us and he has seen us grow enough that now he's going, they've got enough maturity, I can really start reinforcing what they should be doing, and I don't think they're going to turn on me. I think this will work. Verse 8, if you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, so every believer is going to be disciplined once you reach a realm of maturity. If you're not disciplined, then you are illegitimate children and not true sons. That's big. Number one, everyone undergoes discipline. God is not a Disneyland dad. He's not all fun and games, Papa in the sky, Daddy in the sky, who will never get in my face and say, knock it off. God will get in our face. He will discipline us. He will cause sting to happen, get us to knock it off. He does discipline us. He does it because he loves us, and here's the second principle. If you are not disciplined, you're an illegitimate child. The King James uses the word bastard. You're a bastard. Illegitimate children were not considered true sons. Illegitimate children, according to the different things I read concerning trying to get a handle on that and explaining that, illegitimate children were many times the fatherless children. They were illegitimate. They were out of an affair. They were out of who knows what, and now the person got pregnant, and now they've got a child, and the old English word is, well, they're a bastard child. What does that mean? They don't have a dad. They don't have a father. They got a dad. Somebody made them, but they're without the correct structure, without the family, without whatever. With that in mind, here is the Greek word bastard. King James Version uses bastard, so I guess it's not cussing if I say it. 3541 means, it comes from uncertain affinity. It means an illegitimate son or a bastard. Theyre says illegitimate, a bastard. And Thayre takes it a little further with the thought there, which I pulled out of Webster. An illegitimate son was typically viewed as an offensive or disagreeable person. Why? They were fatherless. They were, and we have a saying, fatherless children tend to be lawless, because it's the father who lays down the law, typically speaking, and he's anointed to do that. So they're illegitimate, they're fatherless, they don't have the right family structure, the father, the mother doing it together. They end up growing up being one of those interesting people. They're offensive, they're disagreeable. They're not a pleasant, agreeable person to be around. They've got a side to them that's like, yuck, ew. Webster goes on and says, used as a generalized term of abuse. It's these children who generally got abused. These are the smart alecks on the playground if somebody punched their face in. These are the ones who are mouthing off to the teacher and now they can't get by with it anymore, but it wasn't that far back. Teachers abused children to get them to conform. Well, why are these children that way? Well, they're illegitimate. They don't have the right family structure. A lot of times they didn't have the father. So the picture there is, going back to verse number 7, or verse 8, if you are not disciplined, God disciplines everybody, verse number 7, and he especially does it with you as sons because he loves us. If you're not disciplined, he's looking at you as a fatherless child who's going to be a offensive, disagreeable, probably rebellious, stubborn, unruly person. And he wants to get that out of you. So he's got to discipline you. He can't let you be on your own because you're going to grow up like an illegitimate child, and he doesn't want that for you. There's much better for you. Verse 7 and 8, now I want you to see something here. Verse 7, if you endure chastening, see, you can quit. We shouldn't. Amplified says you must submit to and endure correction and discipline. NIV said, endure hardship. Why is he saying it that way? Because this is voluntary as adults. Now, in a family, the younger they are, the less voluntary it is. But as they get older, It's voluntary from them too. I mean, you get 16, 17, 18 years old, they don't have to submit to mom and dad's discipline anymore. And some don't. They'll just split the scene and run and do whatever. His point is this, the second time he brought this up. Submit to discipline. This is going to sting, but submit to it. Because if you don't let God discipline you, you're going to grow up to be an offensive, disagreeable, stubborn, hard-nosed, you're going to do it your way kind of person, because that's what the lack of what you needed produced. And God says, I'm not producing that in my people. I will discipline you. The whole key is we have to submit to it. Verse 9, moreover, we all had human fathers who disciplined us and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit? There it is again. Submit to discipline, to the Father of our spirits, and live. Submission to discipline is voluntary. Verse 10 and 11, our fathers disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good. So human fathers don't always get it right. God will get it right. He disciplines us for our good that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time. This is going to sting. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Well, why would we do it? So that later on it will produce the harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by discipline, by the painful sting. You say, well, what's it about? It's about training. It's about instruction. It's about correction. It's just a stronger reinforcement of, honey, you need to get back over there. We're not going to let you persist in your ungodly ways. Mm-hmm. We won't let you be an illegitimate bastard who just grows up being this out of control, ungodly person in certain areas of their life. We're not going to let you do it. You're going back over there. Just a stronger approach to it. Verse 12, therefore strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Now isn't that interesting? When he just talked about discipline, he's saying, gird up. This never said this would be easy. Make level paths for your feet so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. So he's hitting it again. You're in a discipline situation with God. Gird up. Submit to it. Don't just go, oh, this is so hard. I think I'm going to faint and just quit here. I'm going to stop. He says, now the areas in your life that are really lame, they just took over. Yeah. I can't do nothing with you. You just quit on me. I don't want that lameness in you to remain. I want you to be healed. Yeah. So gird up and go through this. This will take some fortitude to get through it. That's why he said, look at Jesus. It wasn't all wonderful for him either with what he had to do. Because we can quit, we can give up, we can become disabled as adults. And we're not supposed to do that. He's encouraging us. God will discipline you. There will be things he will do that will sting in your life. Gird up, be a man, and go, you know what? I was wrong. I shouldn't have done it. That's why the sting happened to me. And I just need to learn from this and grow. Now, with our children, the same thing is true. The purpose is not for revenge. The purpose is to create righteousness, a harvest of righteousness, peace, reinforce the instruction and the correction. So with that, I'm going to have Mary come and share just, whatever she's got in her heart, but specifically different age groups. And how can we tell that they're old enough to actually give them a little sting concerning whatever the subject is, and what is appropriate for different age groups? What is appropriate for different, and I don't know if she'll be able to touch all this, but like for instance, some children are smarter than others. Let's just call it what it is. They're just cognitively, they've got it more together and they can see cause and effect much easier. What's appropriate to handle them versus the child who's just like, I don't get it. Or we live in a society now where there's been a lot of drugs done, there's been a lot of things happen, and there's children who literally have brain damage they don't get it, but yet they're still acting out. So what's appropriate? So there's a lot of questions here. Don't know how much should get covered, but come on, babes, and do what you can with it.
All right. I want to establish the fact that as a parent, we are evangelizing the heart of our child. And, it's not separate from that. I mean, if we have a love for God, we want them to have that same love for God and more. That means we have to be evangelists to them. We're on a mission with them. And so we're missionaries to them, and we're going to prophesy into their lives. So we have to know how to operate in all these different things in order to evangelize them and to speak into what's going on with them. And part of knowing, what's happening with the different age groups. If you weren't raised babysitting and doing all that kind of stuff, and all of a sudden you want a child because you want a son or a daughter, well, it's going to start out as a baby, and it'll be the son and daughter, but you might be, I can't wait till they're 16 and we can hang out and all that. Well, there's this whole age groups that we have to come up in. And so then what it'll do is it'll pose the question, what do you believe? I mean, as soon as you have the baby, you're like, oh my goodness, so much new and everything. It's usually between, it can be for some children as early as 10 months, where they'll start to, and they'll arch back and they'll do different things where they know they can get a reaction out of you. Maybe that's all they know, but they're already starting to challenge you in that way, even though they're a baby. But as they're moving into definitely 18 months to 2 years, 2.5 in that area, they really challenge what you believe. And part of evangelizing the heart of a child and knowing what to do in discipline is knowing what you believe. And the quicker you can establish that within yourself, like, do you believe in spanking? This is why we're going through this series, so you can look at what the Bible says and determine what is it that you believe, because your boundaries are going to come out of what you believe. See, and so when the child defies what you're saying right out of the gates, that puts in question, well, what do you believe about that? Do you believe they're supposed to listen to you? Do you believe that they can have 10 chances? Do you believe? It really comes back down to what you believe, and the quicker you can get that established and then anchor that. Anchor it as that's truth to me. This is what I think is Bible. This is what's word. This is what reflects the Father and how the love of God, the love of Jesus operates. And this is what I believe. Then you can first build around that when it comes to discipline. But if you don't have what you believe, the first time a child throws a fit, you will stand in the grocery store and go, I don't know, is that too harsh? Is that too much? Should I have said something? Or you'll take action and then you'll feel guilty about it later, whatever, because you're not sure what you believe. And then it's not just to know what you believe, what does your spouse believe? And what do you believe together? Did you ever take the chance to bring that together and have that conversation? So that's really important to have that established. Now we know, okay, this is what we believe. How do we apply what we believe to all those different age groups? Well, then you first have to be able to understand, how do those age groups operate? One of the biggest questions I get as a pastor's wife is, how do you teach a child to sit during service? Well, a big part of what our society believes now is we can't make noise during service, and we have to be respectful, and there's a lot of that's true. But what happens is, what it does is, if a person goes to discipline their child and that child's arching back and they go, Meh! And then all of a sudden there's this belief like, oh, everyone looked at me, I cannot continue the discipline of my child now because everyone looked at me. Now granted, you don't want to interrupt a whole service, but I think there should be space and there should be understanding for, hey, that parent's about to win. And we should be here supporting that. Like, don't leave the service, man. Just win, do it. Go to the back if you have to, but don't let the child determine whether or not you're going to walk out those doors. You determine that. Because once they show that they can throw a fit, that they can arch back, that some children slap, they do whatever it is where you're like, oh, this is getting out of control, and people are looking at me. And if you believe that when they look at you, you are somehow failing, you are somehow being an embarrassment, you're somehow, you're out of line, because sometimes people will give you that look like you're out of line somehow because your child's acting out right now, then we'll leave out of embarrassment. So what is it that you believe about that? And with our children, they knew we might leave, but you might not like what happens when we do, right? So there might be a little bathroom trip, a little, going out to the van or whatever. And then they'll question whether or not they want to act out during a service. But it really does start very young. And I really didn't have a choice, nor did I have the role model of how that should work. I wasn't raised necessarily in the church and watching children that way or whatever. And my husband was in the pulpit, right? So I stood alone with the kids, and every service he's up there, and I've had to deal with that. And we had two of our children were 14 months apart, so that was like having twins in some ways, right? And when they at very young age would start, as soon as a child starts to crawl, they figure out that if they arch back, they can push away from you when you're holding them. And a lot of times our response is like, oh, go ahead down. Once they figure that out, that's when they're like, this is how I can get down. I mean, that's good reasoning. That's good math in their mind. That's a healthy thing. But they need to understand that no, mommy's holding you right now. And when they start the arching, we're able to talk to them and say, no, we got to sit still. And, when they're real small like that, they don't need a Sermon on the Mount to get them to listen. They little phrases like, no, not yet, sit still. And you're repeating that over and over in order to grow their little synaptic nerves where they get that phrase. They understand what that means. But in the process, you win. Sitting in church, you're able to hold on to them in a way where they know, nope, you're not getting down right now. And you have to be able to win that. If you don't win that, they'll do the arch down thing. Well, then they'll want to run around, and then it'll go from running around to we're going to get them out in the foyer, and then okay, now they don't want to go back in, and so it begins that process really young. And so you have to determine what is it you believe about that. If you believe that that's okay, then you have to be ready for what you believe to take place, because your faith is going to be built around that. And like I said, I didn't really have, where was I going to go, right? We had three sitting there, and we're in the front row. We're the pastors or whatever. I had to find a way. They're going to sit. They're going to sit. And so a lot of that had to do with that up close and personal at a real young age, speaking into their ears and saying, nope, this is what we're doing now. Shh, Daddy's talking, and it's not your turn, and things like that, to be able to whisper that in. And they just eventually, they complied with that. There were a few times we had to leave. But, once that was established that I won that. It wasn't because I was mean that I won it. It's because this is how we roll. This is what we do. This is how our family does it. This is what we believe. That's the end of that. And it was settled. And they could sense that assuredness. But if you are in question within yourself, they will know you're in question. And it doesn't matter what age group, they will press that button inside of you like, is that really what you believe? Huh? Is that really? You really believe that? And they'll press it. And then, and being uncertain, a lot of times as young parents, what we do is we look around. Well, I don't know. They seem like their kids sit. Well, I don't know. Their kids seem to be happier, and jumping around and everything. Which one is right? Well, you have to determine for yourself. You have to go to the Word and determine, this is what we feel for our family. They're going to learn how to sit. This is important to me. This is, So in that, a lot of times we'll see out of our background, the training that we had was there's some pretty important things in life that our belief system should be really strong about. And I just want to encourage you in this. I'm no expert in this area. I've messed up many times with my children. But I can tell you, when you determine what you believe according to the Word, it will produce good fruit in your kids. And so part of learning and having those boundaries and being strong about it is knowing that, once again, we believe this and we believe this is right, and we're going to instill this in our children. And so in order to instill it, you have to understand each age group. At 2 years old is the age of industry. That's when the age of industry starts. That's when they want to look in everything, touch everything or whatever. And I've said this before, that's usually when they get accused of being bad. Because, it's like, oh, the terrible twos, because they're touching everything and opening everything. And it usually starts being, at a year and a half even already, they're doing that. Well, that's their synaptic nerves in their brain kicking in. It's kind of like we don't have certain taste buds until a certain point in our life either. And so we don't understand, why at certain ages we don't like certain foods, right? And those same foods we didn't like, suddenly, we're older and suddenly we do like those foods. It all has to do with the brain connections and things like that. So we got to give them time to grow those synaptic nerves at that point. And so there's a lot to that part of it, and just understanding they might not be there yet. They might not have that cooking yet, and then we get to culture that. So each age group has something to the learning of it and the milestones that you have to go through. There'll be something online you can look up that talks about children's growth models or milestones. Now, those are just things that say, around this time they crawl, around this time they walk. That's not something that has to be an exact thing or something's wrong with your child. They just give you an around. And if we can understand and get to know around certain ages, right, like the age of industry is when they're going to dig in things. That's their work. They're up now, they're moving, and they get to touch stuff, they get to look at stuff, they get to question stuff with all their five senses. They want to experience everything. Well, in that age group, then you have to determine, what are they allowed to do, and when is it okay for them to do, what. And yet, that's the age they call the caveman age. They can say just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to get you to understand what they really feel. And so that's going to cause that, like if you say, we're not going outside today, and, it's too cold outside or whatever, and all of a sudden you find them throwing a fit. Their message to you is not like, I'm going to absolutely defy you right now. I'm going to tell you off. The biggest part of their message is like, I'm trying to get a message to you that I really do want to go outside. And you're not listening. You're like not getting the cue, right? And so what I found with kids, and I learned this a while back, is to help them identify what they're feeling. And when you're instructing them, to be able to say to them, you want to go outside, don't you? And they're like, ah! And then all of a sudden they'll stop and listen. Yeah, outside. Go outside. And it's like, oh, I want to go outside too, but we can't go outside today. But a lot of times that'll be misinterpreted. It's like, you stop throwing a fit. And we start addressing the fit more than we do getting the understanding there. So this is why it's important that we know, there's a process of growing them and getting them to understand. 3 years old, they switch from digging into stuff to between 3 and 4, I do it myself. No, I do it myself. Everything's I do it myself. And there's a part of that that's not rebellion. There's a part of that that says, I'm starting to get confident that I can do really big things. I can put my shoes on by myself. And they want to know that they can do that. But at that same time, you got to weed out what is it that they're learning and growing in. Their synaptic nerves are now kicking in that area versus what are they just being snotty potty about, and they are kind of defying you and they want to, do their own thing. The biggest thing the younger ages groups do is they will peg whether or not you believe what you say. Right? It's their job to challenge whether or not you believe what you say. So if you say no, your no better be a no. Because once they find out it's not always a no, then their job, they kick into job mode like, well, here's what we got to do then. We got to be like a raptor. We got to go along the fence. We're going to find out where the wire is down, where the electric wire is down. We're going to do that. And they're like little raptors that'll go along and say, here we go. There's no electricity on this area. I'm going to press that button. And you can heal that area by making sure a boundary is now in place. But if you don't believe your no or your yes, they don't believe it either. See? So part of our own self-discipline, and it's a crash course, man. You think, I got it. I read like 4 books before this baby was born. I'd babysat or whatever. Even with all of that, you will find you are on a crash course to really, it's like being run through a knothole. You're like, I got to get on top of this. And really what it's putting pressure on you is not how you're going to be this good parent. It's putting pressure on you to determine what is it that you believe. What is important here? And so part of that many times I'll see, and over the years I've seen this, I was bringing it up before and didn't finish what I was saying, is that we will major on the minors many times in our belief systems. You know, and I've seen this with parents where their child can be 5 years old and lie right to their face. And you know they're lying, and they don't get much discipline for that. But if they don't clean the room, it's like a death sentence. Like now we're taking something that is a priority, right? To clean your room, it is. But we're taking the thing that's actually more of a priority and letting it happen. Lying can take you to hell. Cleaning your room, you know, that you have to have an internal measurement always first to what is it that I believe should be out front. What is going to affect them eternally? That's the most important thing. You know, did you wash your hands before you eat? That's a nice thing, but that won't take you to hell, right? Whether your bold-faced lied to me now that's a big problem. That's a real big problem. Anything that is going to affect the heart up front is something that we really ought to pay attention to. And then what is our belief system around that? What is it that we're going to do to speak into that child's life? And I think sometimes the priorities get flipped upside down because the area of, like, for instance, cleaning the room. Well, hey, that's an area I'm familiar with, and I can't get them to listen in any other thing, but by golly, their room's going to be clean. Their soul might be going to hell. We haven't evangelized them at all, but this is going to be our priority because this is the thing I know. I know how to keep my room clean, so they're going to keep their room clean. And it is important that they have respect and keep their room clean. But if they're over here lying, you know, and manipulating and doing all that kind of stuff, that's a big thing. That's a big thing that's going to affect them in all areas. That's eternal stuff. And so we have to look at the different age groups, but we also have to look at what's the impact of their defiance? What areas is it really hitting? And what is it that we're making a priority in and kind of making it into a big deal when really it should be a lesser thing? So I get this question a lot where people will say, can you help me with my teenager? Right? So this is the different age groups. Can you help me with my teenager? Yes, I can give you advice with teenagers to the degree that I know to give advice and what the Word is saying. But a lot of times what we're dealing with here as a teenager, I'm trying to talk to you in the now, but I really have to take them back to here.
Yeah.
Because what's happening here really stems from what should have been taken care of over there. And we look at the now and we go, no, if we just fix this in the now, no, actually, we got to go back. There's some missing things here. There's some things that we have to go back and try to find and get done, because we can't just deal with this now. What's happened in the past or what's lacking from the past is really affecting what's going on in the now.
That is really, really good. And so here's what we're going to do, because you've got way more information that you can give.
Yes.
And our session is up. So here's what we're going to do. When we come back next session, I'll just briefly recap the discipline thing and what we're talking about. And the biggest bulk of that session will go to you working through these age groups, because that is really important, really good.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you for being part of it. Be blessed. We'll see you again.